Welcome back, everybody, to History and Politics at 4 o'clock. My name is Heather Cox Richardson. I'm a professor of history. I do not speak for my employer when I do these videos. I'm going to get right to it today because, as I say, I've learned to hate these people who just chat forever before they start getting to the material that you want. So if I end up not having enough to say, we'll just end early. So let me start here with what everyone's talking about today, and that is the bill that passed very late last night, just shortly before midnight to my chagrin, because I try and cover everything that passes in a certain day, everything that happens in a day. I don't know if you've noticed that. I really do make midnight a cutoff, and I do that quite deliberately for historians who are going to come in the future, who are going to want to know what happened on what day. So there's only one time I have slopped over into a new day and said, this actually happened in the last couple hours into the new day. And that's a heads up to historians someday when they're trying to figure things out. I always think of that woman who's writing our history in 100 or 150 years, trying to give her some clues along the way to make her life a little bit easier. Which is one of the reasons that I tend not to take days off unless it seems like they're good ones to take off, simply because there's nothing more frustrating as a writer than following through a diary and then you get to the day that, for example, that Geronimo decides to leave the reservation, and that's the day he stops writing. And it's like, no, I don't care what you had for dinner last night. I want to know why you left the reservation. And so anyway, I try and answer that. But anyway, it happened just before midnight last night, and I just couldn't face going back and rewriting everything I wrote last night. So here's what people are asking about. Bunch of questions out there about this relief bill. And one of the things that I saw again and again and again today, and I kept asking people, I would get messages or emails from people saying, what's all this aid to foreign countries in the coronavirus relief bill? And I kept saying, I can't find it. Tell me where you are finding this. And it seems to be a meme out there, especially on the right. And let me tell you what I understand about this bill. First of all, I have not read the bill, and I will probably never read all of it, and that's saying something. And the reason that I will probably never read all of it is because it is the longest bill in American history. It is 5,593 pages long. And it jammed the printers, not jammed the printers. There was a problem with one of the printers, which is one of the reasons the votes got delayed last night. That's a ridiculous length for a bill. And that says a lot about where our politics are right now. And maybe I'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that. But what this means is that it is, as it sounds like, a cobbled together omnibus bill. And an omnibus bill literally means omni, everything. They throw everything into this bill. And it's not the only omnibus bills happen a lot of the time. If you're trying to do a number of different things that are all slightly different, you throw them into an omnibus bill. So, for example, when the southern states were readmitted to Congress in 1868, they were readmitted to Congress under an omnibus bill. And that happens on more than one occasion. And it's just sort of a way they don't have to keep going over the same material. So what the story is behind this new bill is this. We have, in this last session of Congress, piled up an unbelievable amount of work. So the House has been doing stuff, as you know, and it's passed a ton of bills. And they go to the Senate. And in the Senate, the person who decides what is on the Senate calendar is the Senate Majority Leader, and that's Mitch McConnell. He's a Republican from Kentucky. And the Majority Leader is the person who puts together the calendar. And that depends on who has the majority in the Senate, which is one of the reasons that people are saying that what happens in Georgia, where there's a runoff between for both Senate seats, which is really weird. It's a runoff for both Senate seats, and they are both currently held by Republicans, one of whom was appointed, that's Kelly Loeffler, and she and David Perdue, the other Republican, are both under ethics investigations, and they're being challenged by John Ossoff. David Perdue is being challenged by John Ossoff, and Kelly Loeffler is being challenged by Reverend Raphael Warnock. And the Democrats are, really look quite good compared to these two people who are under ethics investigations. And it's really turning into a really nasty fight. The Republicans are not terribly strong Republicans, and so they're kind of in the gutter, and it's it's an especially heated contest because if those two seats do switch, the majority in the Senate will be 50-50. It'll be even, Democrats, Republicans. And when that happens, the majority leader is from the party that is in the White House. So if Ossoff and Warnock win their seats in Georgia, become senators, the Senate Majority Leader will no longer be Mitch McConnell, the Republican from Kentucky. It will switch to whomever the Democrats elect. And currently the Senate Minority Leader is Chuck Schumer, but the Majority Leader would not have to be him. It will almost certainly come to a new vote, as I understand the rules of the Senate, which are a little bit arcane, so I could have that wrong. But that being said, that's why things are so incredibly heated, because they're about the Georgia senatorships, but they're really about control of the Senate and Mitch McConnell. So a lot of people who are very tired of Mitch McConnell would love to see the Senate become 50-50 and for him to be knocked out of that position. Anyway, so all of that being said, he has basically, what the Senate Majority Leader does, and the way he has managed to gain such power is because he has used the power of being able to fill out the Senate calendar, simply not to put on it anything he doesn't want to take up. And he also can talk to people on the floor about what goes on the calendar, but he's been able to decide what the Senate is actually going to talk about. And that's why so many things have not happened in Congress in the last over the last 4 years. And before that, obviously, he was Senate Majority Leader under Barack Obama as well. And that's why so little got done, including the hearing of Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court, is because of Mitch McConnell. So there's been a lot that has not gotten done. And what that has meant is that there has been this huge pileup at the end of the congressional session and at the end of this year. And it's a big deal because this is the end of Congress. You know, not cosmically, it is the end of Congress in that the new Congress will be sworn in early January. So this is the end of this particular Congress. So they got a lot of stuff to do. And one of the things that they had to face was the fact that the government needed to be funded. So there's actually, there had to be a defense bill passed. There had to be, which happened a few days ago, there had to be the government needed to be funded. And then on top of all that, there's also some things that were coming due I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And then on top of it all, there has been outstanding this package for relief for the devastation of the economy because of the coronavirus. So what happened last night is that the Congress put together a number of these bills. And the two biggies were the coronavirus package, which came in at about $900 billion, and I'm going to tell you about that, and an appropriations bill, the Consolidated Appropriations Bill. And that is about $1.4 trillion. Okay, so it's one bill, it's one law. It's not a law yet. Trump hasn't signed it. There's one bill. It's got both the coronavirus stuff in it and the normal appropriations in it. These got left till the end, and they're put together in this new bill. And I'm going to tell you about those things, but let me just start right there by saying, is all these people are writing to me saying, why is there, you know, the new museums on the mall in a relief package? Why is there aid to foreign governments? Why is it? It's because it's not in the coronavirus piece of it. It's in the supplemental. It's in the appropriations piece of it. And I'm going to talk more about what it means when we throw everything in a bill like that. But what it has enabled people to do is if they are interested in trying to create anger about what's in a bill, what they are going to do is they're going to pick and choose. And they're going to say, you didn't get what you wanted in this bill. And instead, we gave all this money to, you know, Israel or whatever. I believe Israel's in the bill. I haven't read any of the bill. It's 5,000 pages long, and I'm grading. I will read a lot of it, probably not this moment. I will before I write tonight, but I'm not going to read any 5,000 pages tonight. I'll tell you that. So when you hear about what's in the bill, the chances are pretty good that if you hear somebody saying, oh, the coronavirus package has all this crap in it, they mean this piece has all that crap in it, and that's pretty common. And I'll help you unpack how that happens. But when people are screaming about how the Democrats did that or whatever about the coronavirus package, they're almost certainly talking about this part. And that's entirely different. And it's really misleading for people to do that. One of the things that really surprised me when I started to do a little research into what actually is in this bill, and I'm actually really familiar with revenue bills. I've actually written a book that had a lot to do with revenue bills, so I read them a lot. I'm not naive about what's in coronavirus, but I mean what's in revenue bills, or how to read them. But most people are. And if you just kind of start Googling around and you don't know where to look, it's not at all clear that this is what's happened, that there are actually a whole lot of things put together in this one bill. And that's I understand why people don't know that yet. It's early days, I suppose, with this bill, but it's really disingenuous. That is a lie. When people say, oh, well, so-and-so put this into the relief bill. Well, no, they really didn't. It's in the supplemental appropriations bill, and that's pretty common. And they had to be put together because Mitch McConnell hasn't let anything go forward for so long. So first of all, when you're reading all that stuff, that's probably what's going on. So when you're upset about that, I'm going to tell you in a minute, it's fine to be upset about what's in that supplemental bill, but don't take it out on the coronavirus relief package because it's really not the same thing. All right, so let me explain a little bit about what's in the coronavirus package and what's there. So here's the problem. The problem is that the coronavirus tanked the economy, and nothing's going to help that until people feel comfortable going back into public again to buy stuff and to do stuff again. So all the attempts to sort of force people in, it's really interesting because if you actually look at studies, about how people are behaving, we're not staying home because a governor tells us not to go out. We're staying home because we don't want to get sick. And the idea that somehow you can fix the economy without fixing the coronavirus just isn't borne out. I mean, that's got to be fixed. I mean, Joe Biden's got that exactly right. We got to fix the coronavirus, and then we can fix the economy. And if you look at most of Europe, it's done that. If you are, this summer, there's a lot of spikes now, but this summer, if you were in Denmark or you were in France or wherever, life was pretty normal because they'd gotten coronavirus under control. Now they're locking down again for sure, but they're not suffering the way we are because we never got it under control. So we've got this terrible problem with the economy, and it's a real problem. I mean, let's make no mistake about this. A small percentage of America's done great during during this crisis, but most Americans are hurting very, very badly indeed. And they're coming up against rent payments and the end of unemployment payments, and and they can't get jobs because there aren't any because of the coronavirus. This is just sort of the perfect storm, if you will. So the first coronavirus package passed last, I think it was March in 2020, and that provided one-time payments of about $1,200 for certain people in the population, and it provided loans, and it provided certain monies to try and help people get through the pandemic. But it was only a start, really, and it did help to support the economy. But of course, it didn't look like it was going to be enough. And I'm going to explain more about debt and deficit and all that in just a minute. So bear with me. So what happens is that, if you would, so the House under the Democrats went ahead and they passed another stimulus package and relief package to try and shore up the economy through this pandemic. And that went nowhere. It was almost $3 trillion, and the Senate never even took it up. And what Mitch McConnell said at the time was that we'll take it up in the future when we need it. We don't need it right now because we've just passed this other one. And there was a lot of pushback. So for all that McConnell said, oh, we'll do this later. In fact, McConnell couldn't bring his own caucus behind a new relief package because while some Republicans going into last November's election did in fact want to have some kind of a relief package because that's really popular, there's a number of Republicans in the Senate, in the House, of course, as well, but also in the Senate, which is what I'm talking about now, who didn't want a relief package under any circumstances. And that's because they do not believe in that the government should do anything in a situation like this. They said people should get back to work. They should have to deal with the coronavirus. Most of them aren't going to die. It's only taking a certain percentage of all Americans. And yes, some people are going to die, but the economy is going to come back, and that's how we should run things. What we don't want to do is take on more debt for the American government. So we shouldn't do this under any circumstances. And they kept saying to McConnell, we're not going to do it. We're not going to sign on to any bill because we don't think there should be any bill. So he finally threw up his hands and he said, well, forget it then. I'm not even going to negotiate. I don't need to negotiate. We don't want this bill. We're not going to have this bill. So what happened then was that the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Charles Schumer, who's the minority leader in the Senate, he's the top Democrat in the Senate, tried to negotiate with the White House itself, with Steve Mnuchin at the Treasury Department and with Mark Meadows, who is the Chief of Staff at the White House. And Meadows was like, "No, I'm good. I don't really need to talk about any of this. We don't want a package anyway." And Mnuchin, who's Secretary of the Treasury, was like, yeah, we really kind of do, because the numbers aren't good. And the guy who's in charge of the Federal Reserve, who's a Trump appointee, by the way, to the chairmanship, he was like, we're in trouble, guys. We need a package. So they kind of futzed around with it for a while, and basically they couldn't come to any kind of an agreement because the White House wanted a package of $1 trillion. The Democrats in the House wanted a package of $3 trillion. And finally, Pelosi said, okay, we'll split the difference. We'll do $2 trillion. I'm sorry, I don't know what numbers I was saying there. They should have all been trillions, not billions. House wants $3 trillion. White House wants $1 trillion. Pelosi says, fine, we'll split it at 2. And the White House walks away, says, we're not going to do it. All right. So at that point, we're basically into the election, and there's no package. And anybody who's listening to this and who's been out of a job now for 8 months knows what I'm talking about. We're in trouble, right? So at the same time, so let me just finish with the coronavirus bill. So what happens then is that what really finally brings I've had a terrible time with names all day. What brings Mitch McConnell, what brings McConnell to the table again, back to the table, was this fight in Georgia, because the American people overwhelmingly want some kind of a relief package. They're desperate for a relief package, especially as more and more news comes out about, how the last relief package ended up going into the pockets of a lot of people who weren't really suffering. So they're desperate for a relief package. And McConnell is equally desperate to make sure that the Republicans in Georgia win those Senate seats, because if they don't, he's not going to be majority leader any longer. And once the Democrats are in power, they're going to change a lot of what this country does. And I'll explain that in a minute too, I hope. So he recognizes how popular this is. So he goes ahead and he says, okay, I will entertain this idea. Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of Congress critters, and again, I say that lovingly, of Congress critters has come together and they've said, forget it. We're going to figure out what people need, and we're going to put together a package. And they did. They put together a package for about $890 billion. And that's obviously lower than the White House originally wanted, way lower than the Democrats wanted. But they said, we can do this. And they argued and argued and argued. And it looked like it was going to happen first on the Democratic side and then on the Republican side. And then it fell apart. And it fell apart because what the Democrats really, really, really wanted, aside from the aid to people and to shoring up small businesses and all that, was they wanted the federal government to help out states and local governments, which are going under in this crisis. And the reason that they're going under is because in almost every state, neither state governments nor local governments can borrow to make their budgets work. Their budgets are dependent on tax revenue. But because of the coronavirus, there isn't any tax revenue. So they're all operating in the red. That means they're all in trouble for money. And because they cannot borrow to meet their budgets, that's illegal in most places, they simply have to throw people out of work. I mean, they have to fire people because they don't have money. They have to cut programs and they have to fire people because that's all they can do. That is literally all they can do. So somebody wrote to me furious the other day about how water fees had gone up on him because of Andrew Cuomo, and how was this fair and all that. And I'm like, it's not Cuomo's fault. I mean, he literally has to deliver water, and he has literally no money to do that because of coronavirus, because of this pandemic. And this is, again, normally when the federal government would step in, because the federal government can borrow to meet a budget. States and local governments can't, but the federal government can. So the Democrats wanted the federal government to shore up the states and the local governments. Now, these are not long-term problems in these states or in cities. They are short-term, caused by the pandemic. And the Republicans, for their part, said, ain't happening. There's no way we're going to go ahead. And they said, bail out these blue states and cities, because a lot of their expenses are programs and pensions and things like that they normally pay for in good times, but now they don't have the money to do it. And they said, we're not going to do that. We absolutely not going to do that. They should go bankrupt. If that's what it comes to, they should go bankrupt, which, by the way, they can't do legally right now. I don't believe you'd have to change the law to make that happen. But what that would do, David Fromm's got wonderful work on this, especially in the Atlantic. What it would do is it would enable, if in fact cities, for example, went into bankruptcy, a bankruptcy judge would then decide what bills got paid and what ones didn't, and those would always defend the people who own the bonds. So the wealthy people would do fine, but regular people would lose their pensions. Anyway, so the Republicans say there's no way we're going to give in to this provision. We're not going to give money to the states or to localities. For their part, the Republicans said, listen, all we care about liability protections for employers whose people go back to work and catch coronavirus and die. Like they shouldn't be, or get long-term disability or whatever, long-term illnesses or whatever, that if they reopen, they should have liability protections so that nobody can sue them if their workers go on and die. And the Democrats looked at that and they said, forget that. You've got these factories, especially in the Southwest, for the Northwest, for example, where they had no protections. They forced people back to work sick. They did all kinds of incredible stuff, 19th century stuff. They should be able to be sued for that. So they fought and fought and fought over these two things. And at the end of the day, they couldn't agree. And at the end of the day, the people who were in charge of trying to manage that particular coronavirus bill said, okay, fine, here's what we're going to do. We'll strip out of the coronavirus bill both of those provisions. We'll get rid of the provisions that would help the states and the localities, and we will get rid of liability protection. So neither the Democrats get what they want or the Republicans get what they want, and we'll hit down the middle with this coronavirus package. And that's pretty much what happened. The coronavirus package that passed is about $900 billion. And it has direct payments for people. It's got small business aid. It's got more money for healthcare. It's got that kind of sort of coronavirus directed things in it. And that's pretty much, what it was intended to do. But I will say something else about the coronavirus bill and what is in the coronavirus bill. It's, as I said, about $900 billion, a lot of money, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But one of the things that's in it, if you look closely, from what I've read, I've not read the actual document, but I've read tax documents written about it, is that the direct payments to people that, some people have been writing to me saying, this is ridiculous, that we should have to pay for this and all that. The payments in that coronavirus bill will cost to individuals, it's a $600 one-time payment, will cost about $164 billion. A lot of money, right? But there's something else in that bill that's intended to help people survive this epidemic and businesses survive the epidemic. And that's tax expenditures or tax cuts. And they will cost about $328 billion. So more than about twice what the direct payments will do. And I want to tell you a little bit about, I hope this isn't too much money for you people. I mean, too much like math and ideas for you people, because I know it's kind of my wheelhouse, and I actually find it really interesting because what we do with our finances is, I guess, maybe a little bit like a family, but not really, because when you look at the way a country spends money, it is literally telling you what it values. And so I'm one of those people who can get really excited about, whether there's a tax loophole here or how much they spent over here, because it might look like it's a tax on sugar, for example, but what it really is a statement about what the country stands for. And that's why I find this really interesting. So when I talk about tax expenditures, what a tax expenditure is something we don't talk about at all, and we ought to talk about it before we talk about anything else, because it's a really stupid name, as far as I'm concerned, for a tax cut. But when you hear tax cut, it's a very clever kind of branding, because what it means is that we write the Congress writes the tax code, and it says, hey, everybody should pay, this much money for whatever. I can't even make up something. I've been grading all day. But then they say, but except for you people are going to get a tax cut on that. So what that means is that, and I'll use myself here. So what it says is, if they say you professors, and they never say that about professors, by the way. Here you go. Here's one. Here's in the last Trump tax cut. One of the things that I paid a lot of attention to, because I was moving right then, was that normally in old tax bills, if you moved, you could deduct your moving expenses from your taxes. And what that said was that, hey, everybody's paying all this kind of money, into the government. But we recognize that if you move, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And by the way, moving costs a ton of money. So it's going to cost you a lot of money. So rather than taxing you on that money as income, you can deduct that and say, that's money I didn't really want to spend, and it, I really shouldn't have to pay for that. That's a tax expenditure, meaning that the government's not going to get I'm not going to pay money on that. It's a big hit to the government. But we make judgments about whether or not we think that that's a good thing. So we can take deductions for our mortgages right now. Sometimes you can take deductions for loans. You can take deductions for yachts is one thing, apparently. That I haven't read about, but I've read about people who've taken it who were in the former administration, or the administration's just leaving. But when Trump redid the tax code, or when the Congress under Trump redid the tax code, they changed that moving exemption in a really interesting way. And what they said was that if a company moves you, pays for you to move, like you're an executive and they pay, you don't have to declare that money as income. It's a freebie. So you don't pay taxes on that. But if you move yourself, you can no longer deduct that money. So what that says in that particular example I've given you is that somebody is being moved by a company, which, if you're moving county to county to take a teaching job, nobody's paying for you to do that. It's out of your own pocket. But if you're an executive, it's a freebie. That's what a tax expenditure is. And that's why I find them so interesting. In that case, we're saying, hey, we really want executives to be able to, pocket a little extra change to take care of the trouble of moving and all that. But if you're an artist moving state to state, good luck. That's a really interesting thing to me. So the tax expenditures and the tax cuts in this coronavirus bill make up twice the amount of the money that is going into the pockets of people in those $600 increments. So, but nobody's talking about that, because again, when we hear tax cut, we sort of say, oh, well, tax cuts are good, right? But actually, tax cuts cost the American government the same amount as payments do. They're calculated the same way, but one nobody bats an eyelash over, and the other one becomes somehow a vision of welfare. and usually in a derogatory sense, and people look down on it. And it's like, wait a minute, we are literally in this bill giving $164 billion in payments to individuals who are out of work in this recession. We're giving twice that as tax cuts to people. And mind you, I'm not suggesting necessarily those tax cuts are a bad thing. A lot of businesses, small businesses especially, are really hurting. But it's important to recognize that there's a couple of things going on in here that are going to add to the national debt. All right, so I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute, but I'm going to go back for a second to the Omnibus bill and what's going on in that. So on the one hand, we have that coronavirus bill that I think I told you enough about. I hope I told you enough about. Oh, and by the way, there is huge pushback, of course, on this by people on the left. And a lot of people are frightened about that and saying Joe Biden is and the Democrats are being too conservative and all that. Maybe, but when you read those, do remember that that the role right now of the left in American society is to try and pull the Democrats their direction. So the fact that Biden put his weight behind this coronavirus package is not an indicator that he is a closet Republican in any way. It's an indicator of the fact this was not a good place for him to use political capital and to upset the apple cart right now after all these months of trying to hammer out an answer right before we were about to hit the fan, if you will, not only with the coronavirus package, but also with the other piece of it, which is the Supplemental Appropriations Bill, or what became known in the entire act as the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, H.R. 133. So in that $1.4 trillion package, which is bigger than the relief package, there's a lot of stuff. There's all kinds of, what happens in a bill like that, in a supplemental appropriations bill, is that people throw their favorite stuff into it. And the idea is that this is kind of where everything comes together and people, throw in stuff that they know they couldn't get otherwise. And everybody does this. Is it a good thing? It used to be a good thing. It used to be known as once again, there goes the name. It used to be part of legislating that you often did this. You threw in, a bridge over here and a statue over here. And what that did was it convinced a lot of people to be comfortable with the bills that were going through. And that's a lot of what I think probably happened with this Consolidated Appropriations Act. Lots of these pieces were not going to go by as they were. And so what they did is they threw a bunch of stuff together. So one of the other things that is in this bill is the Supplemental Appropriations Bill has a lot of stuff in it. It's got the stuff to keep the country going. It's also got funding for a new museum. We'll see what happens with that. It has funding for Trump's wall. Well, Biden's already announced he's going to stop all that funding the minute he gets into office. So that was really just kind of window dressing, and it's a lot of money, but it's not really going to go anywhere. There's a lot of stuff in there that's pretty common in terms of supplemental bills, and that's where your money for countries that you're not comfortable giving money to countries is. That's what they used to call it trimming the Christmas tree. They threw a bunch of stuff in there so people could go home to their constituents and say, "Hey, I got you a new bridge." What it's doing now, though, is it's permitting opponents to go onto Facebook or wherever and say, the coronavirus bill has aid to, some country in it, and this is, your money, your tax money being wasted. Now, I'm not suggesting necessarily that you shouldn't be paying a really close paying really close attention to where your tax money is actually going, but there's nothing really terribly unusual here. What's unusual is they put these two bills together. There's also in this Consolidated Appropriations Act something else, and that's worth paying attention to, and that is the extension of tax cuts that had been begun during the Trump administration and that were due to expire. And they were extended significantly by this bill. And that's in addition, I believe, in addition to the numbers I just gave you, and what that obviously was put in there for Republicans who otherwise would not have signed on to the COVID relief bill and probably not to the supplemental bill. But there's a lot going on in this bill. Essentially, it's 2 years of legislation going on in this one bill, and as a result, it's got something for everybody and nothing for everybody, if you will. What is I think significant, though, is the tax cuts in it, and there's a bunch of things significant to it. I'll come back to in just a second, but I did want to finish up with the bills before I went back into the somebody just there's the word pork barrel. I couldn't come up with pork. All I could come up with was log rolling, and that wasn't right. Yeah, this is pork barrel spending. Thank you. I'm sorry. I just totally drew a blank on what the word was. So people have asked if Trump is going to veto it. No. It is my understanding, and again, there's so many of these bills right now moving around. I suppose I absolutely could be wrong. I shouldn't say I suppose I could be wrong. I could be wrong. He is threatening to veto a different bill. And that bill he is threatening to veto is a Defense Appropriations Act. And the Defense Appropriations Acts are like $1 gazillion, and they're not. I'm exaggerating, but they're a lot of money, and they always pass, which itself is worth, I think, maybe revisiting, because no one wants to be the one congressperson who says, no, I don't agree with defense. So they tend just to be rubber stamped. And this one has passed, and Trump says he's going to veto it because he doesn't like the fact that there is a section there. It does not take aim at something known as Section 230, which basically says that tech companies are not responsible for what third parties write on them. So it is my understanding that Trump has gotten very angry with the fact that Twitter has insulting things about him. And he wants Twitter and Facebook especially to be regulated so they can't publish things that are against him. And that's what he's going for. What he has said is that when he talked about vetoing this bill, he said, I will veto the defense bill, which will make China very unhappy. They love it. And what he is referring to in this case is the Chinese social media companies. But somebody else asked, and I'm going to push into this, why does the Trump administration keep hammering on the idea that Biden did something or is doing something wrong with China? And that's a really interesting question, and I think has a lot to do with Trump. So the issue with China, there's a lot of issues with China, by the way. But one of the broad overview of China is that our relationship with China is very dynamic. It's changing constantly, and we're going to have to figure it out. Both sides are going to have to figure it out. But Trump got messy with China in a really big way in the beginning of this year in 2020, when you remember, he started this trade war with China, and the impulse behind the trade war was not necessarily a bad one. China had been a bad actor on a number of fronts, on copyrights and market issues. But of course, what he did is he sparked this trade war that just decimated the American Midwest, because China was one of our major purchasers of soybeans, for example, and they were just like, forget it, we'll get them somewhere else. And they did within weeks. They were getting them from South Americas, I believe. But so Trump had the problem, and by the way, this is why I love economic and political history. Trump had the problem that he did this, which was not thought out. It was not a bad impulse, but it was not at all thought out. There were many ways in which it including through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that it was being worked out. So he decided he was just going to go in there and cut through it with a knife, and he was going to find the answer. And what he did is he threw the middle of the country into a serious recession. Huge numbers of bankruptcies, farm bankruptcies in the middle of the country these days. For the last couple of years, those lands are being bought up by major firms. Family farms are going under in a terrible way. And so Trump, if you recall, started giving payments to farmers in the middle of the country to try and support them through this trade war. which was itself really problematic. If you think about the idea that the Republicans theoretically stand for the idea of, of people who have to make it in the marketplace and that the government shouldn't pick winners and losers, here you literally have the government supporting a sector of the economy because of some kind of trade war that the president started. So what happened was that in the beginning of 2020, Trump was desperate to be reelected, in case you don't remember. And he actually had a meeting, which John Bolton talked about in his book, The Room Where It Happened, in which he said to the leader, I'm not sure if it was the Chinese president or if it was the one of his representatives. It was probably one of his representatives. I don't remember now. But he said, listen, I need help winning this election. And he really laid it right out there. I mean, the Trump was never shy about saying that he was basically trying to buy the election. He said that if China would go ahead and commit to buying significant amounts of American agricultural products, including soybeans, but there were more than that, that would really help Trump in the middle of the country, because the farmers who were starting to turn against him because of his trade war would vote for him again. And so he was desperate for this trade deal with China, and he got it. I believe they signed it, I want to say February 29th, if last year was a leap year, but I shouldn't even say that. It was in February-ish. Maybe it was the first. It was somewhere in February. Sorry, I'm doing this off the top of my head. And he got it. And that's why when we started to hear about the coronavirus coming from China at the time, as it was understood, he kept saying, oh, they're doing a great job. We got no problem. And he tried to be really upbeat about how wonderful things were going to be with China. And that, they'd done it all right, and we didn't have to worry about stuff. Well, then, of course, the coronavirus turns into the coronavirus, and Trump's on the record talking about how wonderfully China's done with it, and how he doesn't have to worry about the way they're handling it, and he's friends with China, and we've got this great trade deal. And then all of a sudden, he's got to try and make that go away, because he doesn't want to look like he was soft on China. And that, if you remember, and you probably don't, you can tell I spent a lot of time doing this, that's when he started to talk about how the WHO, the World Health Organization, had been too easy on China, and that it was all their fault. And that's when he pulled us out of the WHO, saying that China had manipulated them. Mind you, China had not been honest at all with the WHO, but that was pretty much par for the course. They never really were, which was why we actually had epidemiologists who were in China with their ear to the ground that Trump pulled out of there. So this whole sort of contrived fight with the WHO, and it was contrived to the point that the head of the WHO at the time was like, Trump had been very positive about him, had even called him a number of times, and he's like, what just happened here? America was on our team, and now all of a sudden we're the enemy. So Trump wanted to build up this hatred of China because he was in trouble, having been so friendly with China. And then the coronavirus comes in. And if you remember, you may not, but if you remember, there were a bunch of conversations where Peter Navarro, who's the trade guy, and somebody else, maybe it was Mnuchin, I don't remember who, reporters kept saying, is the trade deal still on? And they would say, well, yeah, they're buying what they're supposed to under this trade deal, and we think it's going to go forward. And there were several phases of it, and somewhere in the middle there, I lost track. I think it fell apart. But that's what was going on with that. So then Trump tried to hang China around Biden's neck, and Biden's got no history there at all. He doesn't have the patents that Ivanka Trump got while she was in the White House. He doesn't have. He just doesn't. I mean, he's a senator. He's never had business over there. So that's when Trump tried to turn to the idea that somehow Hunter Biden had been paid off by the Chinese government. And that's just such an incredible stretch. As I recall, he was like, some people he had done business with had done business in China, but there was no payment. Whatever it was like, this was solely Trump trying to sort of muddy the waters so it didn't look like he had underplayed the coronavirus because he was trying to be friendly with China. All right. So when he says, I'm going to veto the defense bill, which China loves, it's just his go-to at this point. And, he's always trying to say, my enemies are soft on China and I'm not, solely because he's trying to get away from that deal he cut at the beginning of the year, which, might not have been a bad deal if it weren't for the fact that the coronavirus was happening. So that's what's going on with that. All right. Down to the last few minutes here. So what other questions did you have? Here we go. I'm going to try and do the highlights here. I've got a whole bunch of things written up here, but I don't have time for all of them. First of all, January 6th. You guys are all worried about January 6th. January 6th is when Congress goes ahead and certifies the votes that the Electoral College has voted. The votes of the Electoral College. So, I want to take a little bit of a step back here and say that one of the things that always jumps out to me about the messages I get from everybody, and I get a lot of them at this point, is that you all want me to tell you what's going to happen. And I can't tell you what's going to happen because nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, I am assuming that the sun's going to rise in the east because a lot of scientists tell me that's the case, and that's what's happened my whole life. But I don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, I'm pretty sure about that one. But I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, Trump could walk out of the White House tonight. He could, I don't know, decide he's going to join the circus. I don't know. We don't know what the future holds, and I cannot tell you what the future holds. What I can do is tell you what patterns in the past have suggested about what's going to happen going forward. And so I can't promise you that everything's going to be fine. But I can tell you I'm not losing any sleep over January 6th. And here's why. When Congress certifies those ballots, what happens is this. The states present the ballots and the Congress says, okay, great. Biden won Massachusetts. Biden won California. Trump won Texas or whatever. I'm off the top of my head, I'm guessing I got all those right. But a single Congress person from the House and a single senator can go ahead and they can contest the votes from a state, from all the states if they want to. That's never happened. It is not unusual. I mean, it's unusual maybe, but it's not unheard of at all for someone to do that. To say, I'm making a statement here that I don't trust those. And they would do so perhaps for the idea of voter suppression. Like you didn't let any Republicans vote, so it's not a real vote. Or because you don't trust the machines, or because, I don't know, you just have the right to do that. But it's very rare for both a member of the House and a member of the Senate both to challenge a state's votes. Now, it could happen, but that's rare. Mitch McConnell is working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen, and I'll explain why in a minute. But right now, there's plenty of representatives who say, yeah, we're going to go ahead, we're going to challenge all the swing states that Trump's been making a big deal out of. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada, and the other one. Sorry. Someone tell me. I don't remember. Wisconsin? Did I say Wisconsin? Off the top of my head. Sorry, it's been a long day. They say they're going to do it. They can. No biggie. I mean, yeah, it's a biggie, but like, whatever. But the question is, will anybody in the Senate do it with them? Because if somebody in the House does it, yeah, it doesn't matter because it's a joint session of Congress. You need to have somebody in the Senate to do it as well. That's the sticking point right now, because if one person in the Senate agrees and says, yeah, I don't trust the votes from Kansas. I made that one up. No one's contesting Kansas. Georgia. Then what happens is the houses go back to their little houses, and they have 2 hours to debate whether or not they're going to accept the votes or not. And from that particular state, there's 50 states, right? So from that particular state, and they will make that decision on a simple majority vote. So the Senate needs to have 51 votes, and the House has to have whatever majority of the House is. That's going to happen. It's the states in question are all Biden states, right? There are also Trump states that you could contest, and nobody's contesting those, which would be quite an interesting thing, actually, if they did. Texas and Florida, for example, but no one's going to do that. It would be interesting if they did. If they did, it would be a really interesting study of our system, but they're not. They're only contesting the Democratic states. The Republicans are only contesting the Democratic states, and the Democrats aren't contesting anything. So the Democrats are certainly going to say, yeah, Joe Biden won those states. That's what the delegates said they did. And moreover, the Constitution says that it's whatever the governor of the state has signed off on, and the governor of all these states has signed off on these. In the Senate is held by Republicans, depending on this Georgia election. But the Georgia election happens the day before the counting. It's January 5th. This all happens January 6th, but nobody's going to have counted Georgia by January 6th. No one's going to know that answer for a long time. So right now it's a Republican Senate. So the question is, what will happen in the Senate? And the answer to that is that there is no doubt, none. I mean, I shouldn't say that because I just told you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But like plenty of senators have said, this is not happening. We are not going to overturn these votes. Because while everybody's sort of obsessing about what could happen and what is Trump doing and all that, you have to remember, Trump lost that election by a lot. This is not on the fence. This is not where he won the popular vote and lost in the Electoral College. He lost by a lot in both the Electoral College and in the popular vote. So even if you're a Republican senator who doesn't like Joe Biden, doesn't like the Democrats, all that, do you really want to be the one who says, yeah, we're going to overturn an obvious election in a democracy to install a man who is acting more and more like he's mad? The answer is simply no. And a lot of them have already said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to certify these votes. So it's not going to happen. And that's why Mitch McConnell, who would be thrilled to leave Trump in office because Trump lets him do whatever he wants, that's why he is trying desperately to make sure that no senator will sign on to any challenges, because that would force the Senate to go ahead and vote against Donald Trump. And why does he care about that? He cares about that because this ties into something else. Somebody asks, why are all these GOP senators especially not speaking up about what is essentially the destabilization of our country? And the answer to that is they know they cannot win without Trump voters. They know they must have Trump voters. And they don't want to do anything to make those Trump voters angry. So having to take a public vote against Trump for the Senate is suicidal. And Mitch McConnell knows that. Now, the question is, and I guess I'm really in the weeds here. The question is interesting for political people. Will the Republicans have a huge problem right now, and I don't have time to talk about it, but there's no longer a Republican Party. There's a Trump Party. And the real Trumpers, the QAnon people and the far right people, they don't want to govern. They want to destroy everything. And even if you are a Mitch McConnell, for example, and who wants to stay in power and doesn't want the Democrats to be in power, you really don't want those people in power either, because you actually need to have stability in a country, or business goes to crap too. And there goes all there goes the stock market, there goes investment, there goes all kinds of stuff. So you really don't want the QAnon people and the far right, the Tommy Tubervilles to be running the Senate, because then you've just killed the goose that lays the golden eggs, if you will. So Mitch McConnell does not want that to happen. So what's going to happen on January 6th? I'll tell you, I can't promise you what's going to happen on January 6th. If I had to guess, capital letters, what I would say is that members of the House of Representatives are going to challenge the certification. Possibly a senator will join them for one or two states. Possibly not, but possibly a senator will join them for one or two states. The houses will have to do a simple vote, and they will come back and they will certify the votes for Biden. Remember, he doesn't need all those states. He needs a number of them, but not all of them. So that would be my guess as to what's going to happen there. I am interested in it as a political historian. I am so not losing sleep over it. I'm really much more worried about the mice who got into my Christmas paper wrapping, and I'm not concerned at all about them. So that's on my scale of concerns. That's way down there. I have plenty of other concerns, but that's not one of them. So that's something to take to the bank on that. All right, so there's been a ton of material here today. I want to tell you very quickly about the differences between the deficit and the debt, and the idea of waste, and what we're doing with the stimulus. And these are really important concepts. And I don't really have time, but I'm going to do them anyway because I don't want to leave you with the stimulus without an idea of what's going on. As I've said before, there's a difference between a deficit, which is the money that the U.S. government budgets and does not take in revenue. That is a shortfall every year. A deficit is yearly. So there's a difference between the deficit, and our deficit right now is horrific. It's the worst since 1946. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. I will say that the case, though, that being the case, though, Trump's tax cuts put $3 trillion into. No, I'm sorry, it's $3 trillion that they threw the deficit way off whack, even before there was COVID. So the Republicans now saying, "Oh, we care so much about the deficit and about the debt." They don't care at all. I'll explain what's happening with that in a minute. So there's a deficit, which is yearly. There's the debt, the national debt. And that is also extraordinarily high. And lots of people say it doesn't matter that that's high. I'm more old-fashioned than that. I actually think that does matter when it's that high. I actually like the idea of a national debt because I think it's important for people to actually have skin in the game in the government. But if it's as high as it is now, huge amounts of our tax dollars actually go into paying off the interest. And that doesn't buy us anything. It just puts money in the pockets of the people who own the debt. So there's two different things. There's a deficit and then there's the debt. And so when people are talking now about the coronavirus bill and actually helping out people, generally under people who believe in Keynesian economics, which is the idea that the government has a role to play in the economy and can use monetary policy and tax revenue policy to go ahead and affect the way people live, generally what they will tell you is what one does, or what a healthy country does, is it does invest in its people when the economy's bad, and that's a good thing to do. But the problem is that really since George W. Bush, we have not been paying down that debt and making the ends meet during good times. So generally what you're supposed to do is sort of cool the economy with financial policies and with revenue policies by having higher taxes when times are good, and then when times are bad, you can go ahead and invest money in the economy. So the idea that people are now, Republicans are now suddenly saying, oh, we don't want to put money into the coronavirus relief package because we don't want to add to the debt or to the deficit. Way too late for that. Not after the amount of money that got pumped into Trump's tax cuts, and that there hasn't been a balanced budget since Bill Clinton. I mean, Bill Clinton was the last person to balance the budget. So that being said, one of the things that's going to have to happen, I think have to happen going forward, and that is we are going to have to review tax expenditures, all the tax cuts that people have gotten, and revenue. I mean, there simply is going to have to be higher taxes on people making more money. There just simply has to be. And one of the things that's interesting about the Trump tax cut is that it actually meant that people in the highest tax brackets paid less tax proportionately than people in the middling tax brackets. And that's simply going to have to be addressed. Or if somebody can convince me that it's not, they're going to have to explain why. And I say that coming at it neither as a Republican nor as a Democrat, but as somebody who looks at how the national debt works and where we are, and will tell you that until really the Kennedy administration, the Republican Party never would have let us get to a place where we have deficits the way we are, and nor would the Democrats. I mean, that it was just understood that the country borrowed during bad times and it paid off its debts during good times, and we just haven't done that really since, the last Republican to balance a budget was Eisenhower and the last Democrat was Bill Clinton. To my mind, we just can't keep living like this. And that's one of the reckonings that's going to have to come. And unfortunately, it's going to fall on Joe Biden. So people are going to remember him for that and maybe be upset. But I don't know. I look at this and I think, I think that the way you prove you're a nation is everybody pulls their weight. And right now, our essential workers and our people who are bringing home really little paychecks for, triple jobs are pulling their weight in a way that Some of us who make more money are really not, is my take on it. That's editorializing, though. That's not history. Although I could tell you that when the Republicans invented the income tax, they deliberately, in 1861, 1862, and 1864, they deliberately adjusted it to being a progressive tax so that the wealthy would pay as much as proportionally as the poor did. And so they always paid more. And that's where it all started from. All right, so one last piece I want to leave you with, and that is that people are asking all the time, what is Joe Biden going to do? What about this? Is he too far to the left? Is he too far to the right? What's going to happen? What's Trump going to do? I want to really reiterate for all of you people listening today and who listen in the future, you get to decide these things. Like, don't give away your power. We're a democracy. And I want to go back now to where I started with the coronavirus package. What brought Mitch McConnell to the table? I promise you he did not do it out of the goodness of his heart. What brought Mitch McConnell to the table is he's afraid Republicans are going to lose because the American people wanted a coronavirus package and he hadn't passed one. And because they put pressure on him, Mitch McConnell bowed to popular will and put through a coronavirus package. So listen, if you want something out of Joe Biden, call your senators, call your representatives, run for office, write letters in newspapers, share your ideas on Facebook, bring people into the discussion. And if you don't want things, do the exact same thing. Similarly, when everyone's so concerned about what Trump's going to do, say this isn't acceptable. Say it's not okay for him to stay. Say we have peaceful transitions of power in this country. Because at the end of the day, if you open up the space and we all cower in the corner and say, oh, what's Trump going to do to us next? He's going to do whatever he wants. But if all of us here stand up and say, oh, no, you're not going to do that, what's he got? And that is the whole point here of what I'm trying to do and what democracy is. We get to decide. We get to decide if future bills have twice as many tax cuts as they have payments for people who don't have jobs. We get to decide who's going to pay what freight in society. And we do that by electing our representatives. But lots of people have said to me, what do I think of Joe Biden's cabinet people? I think they're a great team. Do I like all of them? No. Do I hate any of them? Not really. But the whole point is they're a team, and you can put pressure on a team and you can say, hey, I think that this policy is wacko, but I think you should move over here. And the more pressure they hear and the more they see that, the more that they will respond to what we want. And we are in this huge disjunction now between what the American people want and what our government does. And it's time that we step up to the plate and make that happen. So at this moment, as we're going into a new season, into the winter season, we've just had this conjunction in the skies and this winter solstice, and we're going into a new year. It's our moment. Let's figure out what we can do with this democracy and take it to a place where it looks a lot better than it has for the last several years. All right, that went over. I apologize for that. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be writing tonight. Again, my name is Heather Cox Richardson. I do not speak for my employer when I do these videos, and I will see you on Thursday when we get into anybody who wants to come, for the history of Reconstruction. And this week is the week we start to look west at the creation of the image of the American cowboy. Thank you all for being here.